what I'm going to kind of cover today is to really talk a bit about the history around people analytics, where it's come from, where it's kind of heading today. And then we'll kind of talk through some of the examples and some of the challenges that I think many HR functions are facing in their kind of people analytics journey. Before we then start to touch on some of the best practices and learnings, and then sort of talking around obviously some of the advances in relation to artificial intelligence and then touching on some of the challenges and ethics around some of these things. But obviously a lot of art of what possible has never been greater, but obviously it's still quite early days as well. So as I say, I will try and go through and really focus on some of the practical examples. Everything in the presentation, I put a lot of links to the sources and things. So if people would like a copy, you can reach out and we could potentially share that after. So without further ado, as I've said, I think it's never been such an exciting time to be in HR, as it is today with, the art of what's possible has never really been greater. A lot of people, I'm sure you've heard of concepts like analytics before, big data, artificial intelligence, open AI, machine learning, robotics. These are, I think, many conferences now are talking a lot about these kind of concepts. So what I really try and focus on today is, what does this mean in the context of HR? So I always like to start around people analytics, because I think there's many different terms that people call this. Some call this HR analytics, others call it people analytics. Some would call it human capital analytics. And I think more recently, a lot of people are starting to call it workforce analytics, because it's not just about people anymore as AI and robots start to make up part of the workforce. But how I define this, I like to describe it in relation to 4 domains. So you have the domain of HR, your IT systems, statistics, and science. For me, the interface between HR and systems, this is where your HR information systems come in. So whether you're on modern cloud-based systems like the Workday, SuccessFactors, or the like, that's typically where a lot of that operational in-system reporting would sit. The interface between the systems and statistics, this is typically where your computer scientist would sit. You then have your behavioral economists that sit between the interface of science and statistics. People like myself, as a chartered organizational psychologist, I kind of would see myself between the science and the domain of HR. But really, for me, there's a big sweet spot, I think, around data scientists. These have been very popular, certainly in the past 3 to 5 years, because they sit across, science, statistics, and systems. But really, people analytics is really the center of all of these worlds colliding. So it's the interface of combining people, strategy, science, statistics, and systems. And really, HR is the domain in which we apply to improve the effectiveness of people-related decision-making and human resource strategy. So if you think on the systems, you've got your HR systems, apps, data capture and visualizations, how you're applying statistical techniques, as well as that scientific methodology, research, survey, experimental design, and so forth. So I always kind of say that really it's that diversity of all of these views and domains coming together, which really make that diversity of views, and also it can be quite challenging for leaders, obviously, managing such diverse teams. But that's how I would define this, and that's often a question I get asked. So this is a very well known, I think, concept, but obviously analytics is not a new area or a domain. I think it's certainly been used a lot within businesses in their operations, applying to customer services and marketing and sales. But I think it's fair to say HR is a lot more immature in this area in terms of adoption to other areas. And this is a common challenge that is actually been coined. HR is often hitting the wall in terms of HR measurement. And what I mean by that is that we tend to rely on the very reactionary operational measures and descriptive analytics rather than really looking at more predictive and prescriptive analytics capabilities. So I think for me, a good example of this would be a metric like regrettable turnover. So often this is how many of your top performers have left from the previous year. Whereas, these days you can start to actually predict what's the likelihood of employees leaving over the next 12 months, leveraging, things like random forest machine learning to look at these kind of things. So that hopefully gives you a bit of an example around, retrospectively looking at things that have already happened and due to the operational nature of that versus leveraging some of these more advanced analytics capabilities to help HR peek around the corner and start to answer some of these more strategic questions. So to kind of highlight that in another way, there are various kind of maturity models, and one that kind of I'd like to highlight is that you typically look at what's happened, why is it happening, to what might be happening in the future. And as I've said before, HR tends to react after an event's happened versus where I think the real power is how we can help HR as a function know what's coming before it happens. And this is where, if you overlay things like the Josh Berzon maturity model, and I'm just kind of highlighting this around, well, if you look at some of the measurements here from your operational reporting to more advanced and then advanced analytics and predictive analytics, the percentages there on the right are just showing, well, from organizations that have been surveyed, how many organizations are actually spending their time in those areas. So I think really, and look, I know these numbers have been updated, but there's still very few organizations really doing a lot around that predictive analytics piece. So hopefully that just kind of gives you a bit of an assessment around, like I say, how we're trying to move from descriptive to more predictive and prescriptive insights. We know from research around, well, what are some of the top drivers of people analytics maturity, and just some of the call outs here that, they tend to have more mature organizations are 2 times more likely to have a data council responsible for data governance. I myself have been a divisional data steward for the HR function. So it's a really important role to ensure that how we're using and leveraging HR information, and obviously overlaying, the various privacy overlays and jurisdictions that your organization relied in, because again, really important that you've got good, strong data governance around how HR information is being shared across the organization. Mature organizations also tend to have strong partnerships with business units and corporate functions. For me, a really key important stakeholder is obviously your CHRO, your chief HR officer, and your HR business partners, because they're the window into the organization. They have a lot of the business context to overlay with the data that you're getting to ensure that, look, was that intended or not? So I think it's really important that you're fostering and nurturing those relationships and understanding how HR information is being leveraged and put into various decision forums through your organization. And then finally, and you'll hear a lot about this, where organizations realize that, look, how do you start to get the data out of the limited hands in your specialist people analytics or your HR reporting team to really have that scale across the organization? And that's where you start talking things around, ensuring that you have an organizational culture of data-driven decision-making. And this isn't just about training and uplifting your HR stakeholders in terms of how to leverage data, but the broader organization. And I've seen countless examples where actually they're providing data literacy programs for all of their employees. So as you start to create, all these great, amazing products, how do you ensure that people are leveraging, understanding, using them in the desired way? So I think the first example I shared was like commonly referred to as the first wall in terms of HR measurement. And we have Patrick Cullen and Frank who introduced the concept of the second wall, which is really about the maturity of deployment related to people analytics outcomes. So what I mean by that is that despite the growth in the adoption of more advanced analytical methods in HR, most of the advanced analytics work is really done on a more ad hoc basis or a one-off project basis. So what they're really calling for is that how advanced people analytics outcomes, have been typically delivered in a one-off report or PowerPoint. How can we start to, create the scale across the organization? So, and what I like here is that you kind of start to overlay around some of the skills and capabilities. So if you look at that descriptive analytics, this is typically where your data analyst would be versus your more advanced analytics. That's where you bring in your data science capabilities. And then when you start to think around deployed analytics, this is where you kind of start to get into your machine learning engineers and so forth, and really ensuring that you've got good curated sustainable data models that are not just one-offs, that could really be scaled across the organization. So really important point there. Insight 222, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with amazing David Green and his organization Insight 222. They've done a bunch of great research, and I really like this paper where they kind of highlight the 8 characteristics of leading companies in people analytics. And you'll see here they kind of categorize these in relation to investment, around the influence, the business priorities, skills, ethics, and then the value. And you'll see a nice little kind of quadrant model on the right there where you can start to really how you would measure, democratize, and personalize this. And again, there's a link there where you can kind of go in and look at this kind of paper. But the idea is that, this really helps aim to help CHROs and people analytics leaders really understand what their current position is and really help pinpoint the characteristics that will enable them to deliver more value. And I suppose on the delivering more value, there was a very pinnacle paper by Thomas Rasmussen along with Mike Ulrich and Dave Ulrich. So Dave Ulrich, obviously deemed by many as the modern godfather of HR. And this is a really great paper where they really call for more guidance for impact. And what I really like about this is that how do we start to increase the impact for all stakeholders? And I think really, and again, a link to this journal article, but what they're essentially saying is that don't get too bogged down in the maturity models. Instead, really start to go straight to answering the questions of value for your business to ensure that your people data analytics is aligned and focused really on the impact that to help shape more practical solutions for your business. So as I say, what really I think that what they're saying here is don't really be an island, go engage your business, speak to your business, really understand, well, how are they currently using information? Where are the gaps? What are their key pain points? And as this article is really saying is, don't start to, try and apply really fancy statistics and models. Often, I think the most simplest way is the most effective. As I say, I think the true value is you can have the most advanced analytics capabilities in the world, but at the end of the day, if no one's really taking that insight and driving any action off the back of it, it's kind of all for nothing, really. So I think that I really like this article because, again, it just says, look, let's just go straight to answering the questions of the business and what's important to them. So to bring this to life, I thought I'd give you 2 kind of examples, and this is kind of off our Agile HR Analytics product. But there's kind of 2 personas or stakeholder perspectives I like to think about. And firstly, being that strategic layer. So this is typically your executive level. So this could be your board, this could be your group executive team, or your chief HR officer and your HR leadership team. So the idea is that, what are some of the common questions that they really care about? And look, there's a lot of research here. This is an example from Forbes in relation to the top 10 essential HR metrics that execs care about. Often we get asked a lot is, well, where do you start? And again, go to the questions that they care about, how really, I think, the power of, HR information is that you want to be able to just blend this with other information. So, work with your finance team, bring in your finance overlay in terms of cost, bring in your business KPIs to actually look at, well, as you're working on those key strategic people levers, how is that then addressing your business strategy? Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of when HR tries to have its own dedicated strategy that they're then trying to force on the business. To me, the business strategy is the strategy, and HR's role is how do we enable and support the business to be able to execute and deliver on that business strategy. So I think that's just from I suppose, strategic layer. So my advice to you is that, again, what are those key decision forums and meetings? How is HR information currently being used? Is it just at the back of a pack, and it's not really talked about much? Or actually are using this in a strategic way to start inform, how are we going to win on that business strategy, and what are those key people levers that we need to kind of pull to ensure that we execute on that. The other really critical layer is the operational layer, and I think to the second wall that we talked about, scale, I think a lot of organizations really struggle with this one. And that's because often what I see is that the way that the data and reports are generated is because it's so manual, and often in Excel, the teams really struggle to really provide a consistent set of reporting across the whole organization. So they may only be able to just supply this for the most senior leaders and for that exec LT, and not really be able to disseminate that down across the organization to all people leaders. But one of the things that I found very powerful, and one of the stories I'll share, is that actually as part of my onboarding when I had the role at CBA, and I'll never forget, I shadowed one of our regional branch managers around the CBD that's the Sydney city centre. It's one of the hottest days in the year, so I'll never forget it. And the actual regional manager very rarely spent a lot of time in his office. He actually walked around and visited many of the branches, and his key concern was that due to the operational nature of the business, there's a lot of people calling in sick, unwell, didn't show up, and you needed a minimum amount of people in order to keep a branch open. And from his point of view, if you close branches, it's going to impact the bottom line. So it was a really fascinating time because, after speaking to him, I was saying, well, what insights would be really important for you? And I think the key thing was wanting near real-time insights. So rather than having a static monthly or quarterly snapshot, actually, could I get real-time data from the day before, and actually being able to help inform and help manage the management of his branches and just the operational nature there. And then taking it to that next level, you can start to think around more proactive prompting. That's a big thing now in HR. So again, rather than reacting from something that's already happened, you can then prompt and remind leaders to say, hey, do you know that there's a team member that's due for mandatory learning? If they don't complete that, they're likely to have big consequences and get dinged on their bonus. Or somebody's returning from mat leave. Legally speaking, as a manager, these are things that you need to ensure that you're doing. So the idea is that you want to set people up for success and give them those kind of nudges and prompts and things. So there's a lot you can do there. And if you think around the humble line manager, really, that's how you're going to influence the organization. And that, for me, is the low-hanging fruit, is that if you can start to get the right data at the right time in their hands to action, that's where you really, really start to make an impact. So I think having an eye on those lenses around the strategic is really important. What are those key things that they care about? They're often very lag metrics in nature. But then how through your organization are you getting that scale and getting the information into the hands of those humble line manager so they can drive those day-to-day behaviors and decisions? So so look, I'll pause there because I realize I've been talking a lot before I go into the next section, but just wondering, Aman, if there's any questions that we've had from everybody so far.
If you have any questions, please type your questions in the meeting chat, or you can unmute now and ask your questions.
So we have a question from
Asif.
Yep. Yeah, so great session so far. What kind of projects would you recommend in order to break the wall from descriptive analytics to predictive? Currently, we're working on an attrition prediction model in our business. So great question. So for me, this is where I would look at some high value use cases, right? And one thing that, again, like maturity models are great, but at the same time, not everything is linear. It's not like a Maslow hierarchy of needs and you need to follow sequentially. There is nothing stopping you now doing a predictive analytics use case. And I love the fact that you're looking at an attrition prediction model. That's one that I found is quite popular. And so, so my advice to you is find something that's really going to address a business need or problem and show something where you can demonstrate a return on investment. So an attrition prediction model is a good one. So using something like a random forest machine learning algorithm to understand, well, what are some of the risk factors of, well, why people stay in an organization versus why they leave. And then you can start to then overlay and essentially put a risk score or likelihood of people leaving in the next 12 months. And the great thing is you could use that as part of your talent review and say, well, look, would you care or not? Is that an opportunity to bank natural attrition and have zero people impact if you know that that area is going to get automated or offshored, or actually that's a critical role and there's no ready now successor? We probably want to go in and do something about that. And then you could actually use that to say, well, evaluate the effectiveness of those interventions. Did you manage to prevent that outcome or not? So I think my advice to you is just think around, well, what are some of those high value use cases? Obviously, pilot it in a particular area of the business. So do it small, don't just go big bang. And then in my experience, that's when you start to show some of that value, get some of that excitement. That can then lead to some additional investment and resource to then think around how would you scale that across the organization. So hopefully that kind of answers your question. But yeah, do put in again if not. Maybe one of the questions. So we're saying, do you have any suggestions on key leader characteristics, insights in a model? Probably what I'm trying to understand what you mean by that. So do you have any suggestions on key leader characteristic insights model? So are you trying to understand what makes an effective leader? Is that your question, Anders? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Look, again, there's a lot of research on this. I would recommend. I might be a bit controversial and actually say that, if you look at a project by Google, actually, it was called Project Aristotle. They spent a huge amount of money and resource and had an army of people looking at what makes an effective leaders and teams. And this is where the term coined psychological safety came about, because they actually found out that the characteristics of the teams didn't really say much, but what they did find were things like having good psychological safety. So this is, being able to have clear, transparent conversations, really speak your mind without that fear of consequence. That was really, really important. So if I was going to recommend, there's been a lot of research, but I think having good psychological safety is really key. So I think leaders being able to foster that so people can speak freely. And I think we've all been in those meetings where people are talking and no one really speaks up, and then something goes wrong and it's, oh, I knew that, I saw that coming. So I think, that's probably one example that I'd kind of call out. Psychological safety, is a really key enabler, I think, and that's something I've always looked to foster within my teams, and just getting rid of this whole hierarchical scenarios. This is why people are moving to more agile teams that are empowered and things and so forth. So anyway, I could talk for days about this, but I realize I've got a lot more slides to get through, but I will stop again later and take more questions, and hopefully we'll have a big chunk of time at the end as well. So in terms of the next section, I'm going to just really start to touch on, harnessing artificial intelligence to revolutionize HR. I think, look, for me, I always like to start with what's been coined as the fourth industrial revolution. And this is really blurring the lines between people, technology, and really fusing the physical, digital, and biological worlds. The World Economic Forum really has, there's a lot of research here. And again, there's a source link here to kind of papers. I'm a recovering academic, so I like to read. But essentially, they really call how this is really a fusion of advances in the artificial intelligence, AI, robotics, the Internet of Things, Web3, blockchain, et cetera, et cetera. And look, the reality is the speed, breadth, and depth of this revolution is really forcing us to rethink how countries develop, how organizations create value, and even what it means to be human. And so really the fourth industrial revolution is more than just about technology-driven change. It's about an opportunity to help everyone, including leaders, policymakers, and people from all income groups, nations, to really harness covering technologies in order to create a really inclusive, human-centered future. So a lot of positive intent, but we'll put a pin in that and come back on that a bit later. I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention the Gartner 2023 hype cycle for HR transformation. I think, look, so many HR functions now really going under a digital transformation agenda. And look, it's predicted within 5 to 10 years, HR technologies will really be an essential enabler of this transformation. And it shouldn't really come as a shock to people that, look, it's with its ability to automate, improve operations, transform user experience. So a lot of people, I think employee experience is a very topical thing right now at a lot of conferences, and really providing insights to make better, more informed decision making. I think, look, AI is going to be front and center to that transformation agenda. So what is AI? Look, there's many branches to this, but look, it's a branch of computer science concerned with building smarter machines capable of performing tasks that typically require human intelligence. So it's really the ability of the digital computer or computer-controlled robot to perform tasks that are commonly associated with intelligent beings like us. And look, AI is really defining to that end what it is to be human, what it is to work. Machines can really augment us in all sorts of interesting ways. And AI will lead to new economies, transform cities, and so forth. And just as a few of the examples here, I'm sure you've heard of OpenAI ChatGPT, you've got Copilot from Microsoft, Now Assist. Josh Berzin's just launched his own product as well. And so really there is a huge arms race right now for a lot of HR tech suppliers to deploy Gen AI into their products. But at the same time, I do think, and I think this is an interesting article from the Boston Controlling Group, where although people analytics, strategy, planning, and analytics were ranked as the foremost future-focused topics in the realm of people management, there was clearly a striking disconnect, however, given that only 35% of HR professionals really agree that their organization's people management function effectively leverages digital technologies. And again, only 30% report that HR harness data and analytics to anticipate people-related challenges. So a bit of a disconnect there. So although it's voted number one, not many functions are really doing that. And as well, there was another survey, a recent one by Mercer, end of last year, for chief HROs, and 41% of those really expressed a desire for greater depth in data analytics, and around 60% see technology and automation becoming much more prevalent in the future. So, and again, I think this has really been exacerbated, accelerated as a result of things like ChatGPT. And yeah, so I think this is something that's going to dominate many HR conferences. As I say, a lot of CHROs are really starting to look at how they can leverage this in the HR domain. So, but before we kind of go on, I think for me, really before we get too excited and start to invest and look at the art of what's possible in terms of these products and suppliers, I really think there's just getting some of those key foundations right are really critical. And I could probably spend a whole hour just talking to this slide. I often refer to this as your HR data ecosystem. So really, if you think about how are you currently collecting HR information, where is that being stored, what systems, and then how are you enhancing and curating that to then how is that being consumed and shared across your organization? And look, the reality is HR has often been very underinvested in technology. So, the reality is that there's very rarely end-to-end process owners. You might have a modern HCM solution, but very rarely all the data's in there. And the nature of HR, it's built of functional silos. Each silo tends to have its own system of record, and thus they don't often talk to each other. And what I mean by that is that there's a lack of integrations. So we're trying to then take all of this information, stitch it together in Excel, and try and generate some reports and things from that. So really understanding your data ecosystem and getting the investment to really try and modernize that, put in the integrations. And as you go on your analytics journey, and I'd be speaking to your enterprise IT function, because what's their strategy? And I guarantee you, most HR functions, they're going to be on a lot of legacy and tech debt that people keep adding to, but everyone's moving to kind of more modern cloud-based analytics solutions. So this is often AWS or Azure. You've got things like Databricks, Snowflakes. You may or may not have heard of these things, but essentially they're data lakes or data lake houses. And really, how as a HR function are we starting to kind of migrate and build into that environment? So what I'd be saying is, do a bit of a current state assessment around where you are, and then based on where you want to be strategically, you can start to build that interim state. So just an important part of that puzzle, and when you start to think around build versus buy and so forth. But as I say, a lot I can talk to that, and apologies if that's a bit technical, but this is a really important piece of that puzzle. And essentially, in a very layman's simple term, don't go off and get it too excited and go straight to the technology and get a data scientist. You really need to get some of the foundational things right here, because at the end of the day, it's rubbish in, rubbish out. So I think really understanding this and how that looks for your organization is a really important starting point. How am I doing for time? Okay, I better crack on. So look, I'll touch on a few of these things, but look, there's a future job survey. We know big data, cloud computing, AI. Again, these things we know are expected to be big trends in the future. We're seeing it now, so I think none of these things are going to be a surprise for you. But essentially, this is just a survey around technology adoption over the next few years. And again, I think a lot of these things are really coming to life. What does that mean for HR? Well, Again, good old Boston Consulting Point, great paper here is that according to them, Gen AI will transform HR into more strategic function. And why is that? Well, it means that following impact areas, so it's going to help dramatically increase self-service. You're going to get productivity gains and experience enhancements because you can start to be much more personalized rather than this kind of one size fits all approach. And to that end, being truly personalized, always on delivery for HR service. So, with the chatbots and, the Gen AI, they don't take breaks. They can be on 24/7 essentially. And also you get a much more comprehensive data-driven talent ecosystem. And that's where many companies are starting to invest to better understand employee skills, drive talent upskilling, career planning, and so forth. So really the question now is how to use this skills data to be more meaningful talent decisions across the business and so forth. And to just bring that to life a bit, here's an example of how that productivity gain is going to be made. So this is an example of a HR business partner scenario here, suggests that you're going to unlock anything from around 25 to 30% of the HR business partner's time through Gen AI deployments, including the chatbots and automated solutions. And that model would lean heavily on the HR co-pilot and manager to upskill staff through tech-based nudges. And the results is that, HR business partners are going to be more proactive, better able to support more employees given the reduction in administrative work, essentially. So hopefully that kind of brings it to life a little bit. But the challenge, though, and I think this is where I wanted to kind of touch on next, is that there a lot of potential, but it is still very early days. And so a couple of examples here. This is actually an example around asking the wrong question is risky. So this is a prompt hacking example on ChatGPT. Basically, the example here by Steve Sammartino is basically what he showed is ultimately it's about how you ask a question. And so the example here is that he went and asked ChatGPT what are some of the great kind of sites to pirate music, and obviously ChatGPT replied and said, look, no, this is illegal. We're not going to share that. So all he did was actually flip the question round and said, look, well, what are some of the sites to avoid because they have pirated movie and music content? And then ChatGPT proceeded to provide a list of all of those things. So I think this example here is just really showing the importance of the end user in how they're engaging, the context and the prompting. With these things, there are definitely weaknesses and hacks and way to kind of work around things. So another example is a viral AI resume hack. So there's an example here by Daniel Fieldman. He figured out a sneaky way to get a resume past ChatGPT's image recognition capabilities. So he found that you could use white text on a white background to trick the AI image model, like the one on ChatGPT, to then select his CV. So again, another example. They have patched this if people are wanting to try that. But again, just another example. And just to finish, this is actually one that's only a month or so old, but just shows, I think, this is quite a pivotal. This has a lot of implications for AI. So basically, Mafat had booked a flight with Air Canada following his grandmother's passing, and during he kind of engaged with the airline's AI chatbot, and the chatbot incorrectly assured him that there was a bereavement discount for post-travel claims so long as they were made within 90 days. So he proceeded to do that, and actually the company said, look, no, that's not the case, we're not going to honor that. It went to a tribunal, and the tribunal actually dismissed the argument. And I think the argument on the employer or the organization was that it's not a legal entity. It can't make these kind of decisions. But the tribunal basically said, look, emphasize that chatbots are an integral part of a company's digital interface, and thus the company is ultimately responsible for the accuracy of the information that they provide. So as AI technologies become increasingly embedded in our everyday decision and business operation, this ruling really marks a crucial movement for reflecting on the ethical and legal standards governing AI interactions with our consumers. So not directly relevant to kind of HR, but I think, look, the important point here is that these kind of, I think you're going to see a lot more of these kind of tribunals and lawsuits and things. And I suppose to that end, there's a lot of examples where HR have got this wrong. So, I think just in Australia, as an example, the Australian data breaches have spiked to nearly 20% at the end of last year. Bank details, TFN personal details of applicants have potentially been compromised. Payroll, HR information. So again, there's a lot of nervousness of organizations that, people are starting to upload confidential documents into ChatGPT and, proprietary information and things. So there is a lot of worry and concern around how we're going to control this, how this information be used, what are the decisions off the back of that. So again, lots of positives, but again, maybe temper some of that enthusiasm around, that it is still early days for this. So just again, touching on that, I think the key insight there is that we really need to consider some of the legal and ethical implications of AI biases. Unfortunately, as the technology is built by humans, existing human biases are often then transferred into these artificial intelligence models. So again, a few examples here around Amazon scrapping sexist AI hiring tool. Workday is currently going through a lawsuit being accused of its AI function discriminating against applicants and things. So really my message here is that, HR really should consider the legal and ethical implications of AI biases within the tools. So my recommendation is that, make reducing AI bias a determining factor when choosing your HR technology. And particularly if it's a black box and proprietary, I think we need a lot more transparency into the models and the algorithms. Don't take things on face value. You want to know and question the effectiveness and, what were the sample, how is it considering for some of the diversity factors and things like this. So, again, how am I doing for time? Probably a couple more slides, and then I was hoping to give you a bit of a demo of a virtual agent, and then we can kind of jump into some questions. Just to kind of continue on the topic of ethics, there's a great piece by Unilever, and a lot of organizations are starting to create clearer policies around AI and ethics. And I really like the one by Unilever because, they've already have quite a well-defined approach to information security and data privacy. So they really wanted to apply that to ethics and just put in place a lot more assurance around AI and the process there. And what I like here is that firstly, they say, look, we'll never blame the system. There must be a Unilever-owned accountable. And we will use our best efforts to systematically monitor models and the performance of our AI to ensure that it maintains efficiency. And also importantly, any decisions that have a significant life impact on an individual, they will not be fully automated. So it's a little bit like if those of you are familiar with GDPR type legislation, it's where individuals they can request speaking to a human. So if there's been an automated decision saying your application it doesn't meet the mark, it's a no, people can request to say, well, I don't want a robot or an AI model telling me that. I want a human to come in, review and validate. So I see a lot of these kind of things that, yes, it can be really good and help automate that, but it will still not negate the need of people to be able to review and vet that. Because again, there's always going to be outliers, right? And it's never going to work 100% of the time. So to that end as well, there's a great piece of work. I attended a webinar with Qualtrics, so they do a lot of surveying and things, and they did a big study where I think they surveyed over 35,000 employees, and what they're finding here was really interesting is that, look, employees state that they're open to AI so long as it's not too personal. So what they mean by that is if you look at things like writing tasks in a personal assistant or virtual agent, people are largely comfortable with that. However, they're not so comfortable when it comes to things like doing their performance appraisals and job interviews. So I think really the message here is that we should be prioritizing. So again, coming back to that use case, I think around where would we leverage this? I think we really should be prioritizing building trust and leveraging AI to really enhance human connection rather than replace and perform more personalized things such as performance appraisals and job interviews. And my last slide, before I kind of go into a bit of a kind of a demo on a virtual agent, is that my personal belief and prediction is that, and it's kind of, this is my quote above, is that I believe distinct human qualities such as awareness, compassion, empathy will become more important than ever. And so the concept, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of purple people. I think this was a term coined by Deloitte, where essentially purple people are the individuals who blend the red of technical expertise with the blue of business acumen to create purple sets of skills. So I often refer to them as the analytical translators, so they can really bridge the gap between kind of really technical people and then business stakeholders. So I think for me, that's a really important capability. And so look, no matter how accurate or comprehensive the insight is, the value it provides really depends on the receiver's willingness to use it. So again, it comes back to that article around insight to impact. So thus, if they're skeptical, if they're fearful or resistant to information, they're really unlikely to leverage it. So thus, the concept of emotional intelligence, or EQ, will become more important than ever to really help identify what are the hidden issues and how you can deliver insights to the stakeholder on the other end. How are they going to receive, embrace, and leverage, i.e., take action off the back of that? So I think the good news is for everyone, AI is not really going to be able to do this well. So I think it's those innately human qualities that are going to be more important than ever. So I think the hope and the expectation is that this will really help augment work and help automate a lot of those administrative tasks and things, and free up time to invest on the more strategic and more innately human qualities of work. But again, still early days. And I think you still need to apply things with a healthy level of skepticism. But obviously, a lot of excitement and opportunity here that we can start to take advantage of. And to just finish with, I thought, we could give a bit of a demo or example from our product. We've actually created a virtual agent. So this essentially, for those who aren't familiar, if you imagine things like ChatGPT, companies can start to buy their own license, bring it into their ecosystem. So in other words, it's firewalled, no information's going outside the organization. And then that way you can start to upload your policies, procedures, your knowledge articles, as well as your data and reporting. And then start to query that in a very natural language way, like engaging with a chatbot. So to kind of show you that and bring that to life, here's a bit of a scenario. And by the way, this is a real example, but obviously hypothetical organization. So the scenario here is that the CEO of a global finance company has just had a one-to-one with his executive of supply chain to discuss the company's diversity goals. And many organizations have a 5-year diversity goal. Often, they want increased female representation at senior levels to 40% by 2025. And you'll see on the report here that supply chains at 27%. There's a year away from that. And so CEO's not happy. What are you going to do about it? So the exec for supply chain calls up his HR business partner and says, look, I need a meeting in 3 days. I've got to come up with a plan. I need your help and advice. So this is where the virtual agent comes in. And the HR business partner says, look, right, I'm having a meeting with our supply chain executive. Please, can you tell me some of the key headline diversity inclusion statistics for this business? So the virtual agent says, absolutely not a problem. Here's a summary. Here's the key headlines. Here's a link to the LAX report. And actually, we will bring up that report automatically filtered for the person you're interested in. And here's your information. So I think, great. Next question. Well, what is our policy? So what is our global policy? We're a global organization. Can you tell me that? So again, because we've got all the policies in there, we can say, well, here's the document, here's the page, and we can send you a link directly to that. And here's again a summary of what that says. And in this hypothetical scenario, the next thing is, well, actually, we're a global organization, but I'd say 90% of the supply chain workforce is based in Australia. So could you tell me what are some of the local legal and compliance rules that we need to be aware of within Australia? And this is where it gets really interesting, because, you know, there are various national and state-based requirements. So you've got things like the equity opportunity laws, workplace gender equality, disability discrimination. So again, each of these kind of legislations, it can summarize for you, provide you a link of what that legislation is. So hopefully, you know, within seconds, if you imagine if I was in the hands of the HR business partner supporting this person, I would have to go wade through all of those policy documents. I would have to go and engage the reporting team and get all those static reports. I'd then have to go and consult with the legal team to get some advice. So this is where I feel that becomes really powerful, to be able to provide those kind of insights and really help the HR business partners have those key strategic conversations and not just kind of focus on doing all of that admin and pulling. And they probably scrunch together all the information, but they've not had time to actually process that, turn that into the insight. What are the actions that you want to take off the back of that, and so forth? So for me, this is where I think the real power of this technology can be applied. And obviously, this is a use case for diversity inclusion, but you could apply this across all the different human capital areas or the cyclical HR processes. But again, with all of this, with temper the caveat this, that you'd still want to run this by your legal team and, you know, put health warnings and things. But this is where I think it gets a bit exciting. And remember, this would be within your own corporate license. So again, you have full control over what you're feeding this. But again, my final point is, before you start to invest in great technologies like this, you need to get those data foundations right. If you've got outdated knowledge articles, you've got 4 or 5 different policies, the insights and things here are just going to be very inaccurate. So again, you need to start and get those data foundations right before you kind of reward and start to look at some of these things. So with that said, I think I'll probably draw a close there, and probably got plenty of time for questions. So yeah, I think that's all my slides. Thank you, everybody.